I am recording, so let me introduce it and then we'll get started. Well, welcome to History for Lunch. We're in the month of November, and today we have Dr. Hilary Green with us, and we're delighted to have Dr. Green back. She was a professor at Elizabeth City State University. She is now at the University of Alabama, and she's actually spending some time at Davidson right now, back in North Carolina. So we are delighted. So Dr. Green, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you so we can get started today.
Thank you so much for inviting me today and to talk about some work I'm doing. And I am going to pull up my PowerPoint slide if I can and go from there. So this topic is really drawn upon some of the work that I did while I was at Elizabeth City State University, and what struck me as the amount of rich Civil War history and the role of African American Civil War as soldiers, but also as veterans. And as I continued to do this work, it made me realize how much of this history is valuable for larger conversations and what we can learn from this generation of leaders. So, African Americans in Northeast North Carolina served in the Civil War, and they represented a large number of people, whether they were from the various counties, in particular Camden, Pasquotank, or Queens, or Camden, but also to those who run away to Elizabeth City and Eastern North Carolina when conditions avail themselves to do so. So as a result, we have a lot of African Americans who enlist. And they serve in both the Army and in the Navy. So when they come back and seen by other people in the community as heroes, those who helped to win the Civil War, emancipate African Americans still enslaved, but to create a new order no longer defined by slavery. So as a result, communities as early as 1866 celebrated Emancipation Day, where these veterans were at the core of those parades and celebrations. And these are some of the examples. So we have African Americans who parade for emancipation. They remind people in Elizabeth City, but also the surrounding areas, that they were free, the role of veterans in making that freedom possible, and that they had to be reckoned as equal and free citizens in the area. So the way they did this was to claim the streets, and they claimed the streets regularly on January 1st every year for about 1866 to as far early into the early 1930s that they're doing this before it morphs into another tradition. And these parades, whether at the front of the parade line or at the back, would be these veterans. And they would come down Main Street. So if you think about the current day parades in Elizabeth City, for instance, come down, turn by Muddy's, down Main Street, and go down to the waterfront. So these routes took on that shape. And so they would come down Main Street and stop at the courthouse. And at the courthouse, they would stop there, and then they would hear speeches. In the case of one in 1888, Hugh Cale, who would help get the legislation for Elizabeth City State University, is one of the speakers, but also other African-American leaders and also their white allies would give these addresses. And then once those addresses were done, they would parade all the way down to the waterfront. Sometimes they'll have picnics there and lunch and celebrate with one another in fellowship, or they would turn off and go towards a local church, and that would be their final destination. But when Elizabeth City State University is in its current location, they would turn down and march down back to the campus and then end the parade there. So it was a public demonstration. And it was one that was recognized regularly in the local newspapers. So the examples I have here in 1874, you see Thomas Sykes, who's a lawyer, and the Honorable J.H. Shaw, who are giving the addresses. And then at the 25th anniversary of Emancipation, which is a larger one, you have a couple senators there, you have Hugh Cale and others. But these veterans at all time would be the stars of these parades. And so the celebration of the one cause, from active participants to when at the end of their lives, that their lives are dwindling in numbers, they are in wagons and other conveyances. And then it's the new generations of the World War I years, as well as the Spanish-American War, that will take over. And one of the interesting legacies of this initial emancipation celebration, where the veterans were honored, is that this tradition continues today with the Elizabeth City State University homecoming parade routes that continue to use the same pathways that were done by the Civil War generation. And it's those legacies that are hidden in plain sight that I think is something to talk about and we should know more of. The other thing they were comrades. They were comrades in the Grand Army of the Republic. So as a lot of veterans there, Elizabeth City would have its own African-American post of the Grand Army of the Republic, which is a biracial organization celebrating federal veterans of the Civil War in both the Army and the Navy. There will also be at least 3 different African-American posts in in Hampton Roads area, in particular the Norfolk area in particular. But also too, you have veterans who would come to Elizabeth City to organize with this, and it's a way for people to travel. So there's a network between Northeast North Carolina and Southeast Virginia of veterans and making sure that they honor one another. And as a result of the numbers, in particular, thanks to Chris Meekin's work on the Fletcher Post, we know why Elizabeth City would be chosen in 1898 to host a reunion. It was a relatively large post for terms of African Americans, and also is one that was central in this organization that connected both Virginia and North Carolina. And one of the early leaders of this would be Moses Spence. Moses Spence, and sometimes he's listed as Spencer, so it's just a clerical error, but it's the same name, same person. He was a long-term post commander. He was born in the region as an enslaved person to enslaved parents, Moses and Sylvan Jennings Spence. He would enlist in 1864 in the 37th USCT Infantry, and he would serve in both units H and I. He receives a pension in 1890, and upon his death, his wife will as well. He is interred in Oak Grove Cemetery, as some of the other delegates for this. Francis Turner, at the 37th USCI Unit F. He would also be an active member of the Fletcher Post, but also too, he was at this celebration as one of the public delegates. He too is interred in Oak Grove Cemetery, as well as Edward Vaughn, who's an alternate. Even though these are the 3 men listed officially in the program, the entire post, as well as those who were not affiliated directly with the Grand Army of the Republic, came to Elizabeth City. They came to the courthouse. They celebrated with white and Black veterans and remembered their service, their sacrifice, and this was a grand affair celebrated and hosted in the city. This reunion sadly gets lost in, as the war gets remembered over the earlier 20th century, but it's something that is unique that happened in Elizabeth City and Northeast North Carolina, because the other times where you have North Carolina hosting a Grand Army of the Republic, it'll be in the New Bern area, where there's a large contingent of Black posts there and Black veterans. So the Northeast North Carolina on par with the New Bern area and able to celebrate this comradeship in arms. But one of the things that they did importantly that was less public was honoring the following comrades in death. And they did this by ensuring that Civil War veterans received headstones. In particular, Grand Army of the Republic veterans received headstones upon death. And these will be official military headstones put in segregated cemeteries, but they would be honored together as a unit, as a group together in their communities. And this particular picture that comes from the early 1900s in Norfolk, Virginia, it's around 1910. is at one of the major cemeteries there, the West Point Cemetery. And in this image, even though not all of them are labeled, we know from the archives that several people from Elizabeth City are in this picture, some people from Hertford, but also to Perquimans County as well are in this picture. But you can see in these men, they're older, they have gray beards, but yet they are standing upright and they're looking at the camera and they're showing a pride for one another. And at this reunion, they went to the cemetery to have their services for those who had died previously, and then honor those who continued, but modeled what is good behavior in terms of future veterans. And in some of these, in the later pictures, you'll see some of the Spanish-American War veterans with them. But this cemetery is important because in 1885, at the urging of the first African-American councilman, James E. Fuller of the City Council, the West Point Cemetery has a section designated for Grand Army of the Republic veterans and other Union veterans of the Civil War. And it's section 20. And in total, there'll be 58 veterans, largely from Virginia, but there are some from Northeast North Carolina buried in the cemetery. And not only is there a cemetery here, there'll be 2 monuments that would be placed in honor of these soldiers. The first one was be a base that will have the top of the William Carney monument, and there's also an angel placed there by the men. And it's this work to honor those fallen, and we talk about the monuments, the baits, we forget about the other monuments, the headstones, and where people were dying, and making sure that these men had a voice in a protected, segregated space that would be free from violence and harm. Well, in Elizabeth City, the Fletcher Post did something similar. 4 years after Fuller made the designation at the City Point, West Point Cemetery, in the North Carolinian, 1889, there's a mention how the Fletcher Post are doing the same. And what they're doing for this creation, the Oak Grove Cemetery, is they are reinterring people who died previously and placed in other cemeteries into this one cemetery, ensuring those veterans had headstones. And then as the generation continues to die, to be buried together. So Oak Grove is one of these hidden gems in the city where we also have Rosa Spencer is buried back there, some of the people who will be in the 1898 celebration, but also others. And it's in this historic Black cemetery that we see how the Grand Army of the Republic continued, and their insistence that these men, even in death, their sacrifices will be remembered for themselves, but also later generations. So we talk a lot about veterans in public spaces, whether it's the parades or in the Grand Army Republic, but there's also another major and significant role that sometimes gets understated, and that's them as race men. These are leaders of their community and leaders of their community that are shaping the next generation. So with the franchise, and when these men are voted in large numbers and engaged in local politics. So you have people like Hugh Cale, they are supported by veterans. They are also the ones who will be encouraging the election and support of local politicians. Some will try to run for office, not always successful, but they're shaping policy, and they're seeing this as their duty beyond the battlefield and what they are doing for the next generation, and making sure that freedom means something, their service means something for the next generation. They are also institutional leaders and sometimes institutional founders of churches, fraternal orders, and other organizations. So they're setting a modelship of community leadership that's not just tied to the church or schools, but to military service and veteran status as a source of leadership. But one of the most important roles that these men do, and it has to do with this picture here, they are parents. They are modeling to their children within their household to what their Civil War service mean. After, with freedom to go be educated, to go to church, to be good citizens, and for their sons to become soldiers and then themselves come and become veterans. And this is where they saw the possibility and used their veteran status, whether it's as a parent or as a church leader or as an institutional leader, to model military service and veteran status as racial uplift. And it really shows what Latrice Donaldson does in her new book, Duty Beyond the Battlefield, that these men modeled for the Spanish American War veterans, the different engagements along the Mexico border during the early 20th century, but also World War I. Once they come home, they had a responsibility to the community. And that responsibility to the community meant they were race men, race leaders, good citizens, and that they uplift the entire community. And it's that modeling that I think is important. So in this picture early picture from Elizabeth City State University, Peter Moore is in the gentleman sitting up front. It's from 1899 about. Those children are the children of veterans, some of them. They're learning from the porches of their fathers and their uncles and their brothers, some of them. They're the children and nieces and nephews. They're going to be the ones who will put up monuments and ensure that the aged Civil War veterans who are dying now have end-of-life care. So it's that leadership, that modeling, that community engagement that these men are doing. And this is something that's important in how their legacy lives on through these individuals in these classrooms, in the churches, and those who remain in the community. And some of those generations do something important. They remember those who came before. They will make sure that they continue that oral tradition of teaching the next generation about the service and sacrifice of the Civil War generation, as they themselves learned it from the steps and the ears and heard from the living ones. They will also, too, put up another rare monument that Northeast North Carolina has. This is the monument in Hereford. These women were the wife of Isaac Woods, and his daughter would be some of the women who would be responsible for putting up this rare monument. And this monument comes before the downtown Hereford Judy C. monument comes up. This one predates, so it's smaller. It's a little bit in size. It's not as impressive as most, but the fact that it's outside the cemetery, it is in a public space. It's in the heart of what was the Black community that would have been where, so people going to and from school would have had to seen this. People who were going uptown into the downtown area when they had a chance would have to go by this. They were constantly and daily being reminded of the sacrifices of the Civil War generation. And this was done by the women who fundraised extensively through the community to make sure that they honored those who came before and fought and sacrificed during the Civil War. And doing this in the height of disenfranchisement and African Americans being pushed out of public places, this monument is something that we should know of, praise, and celebrate, because it is a rare occurrence. Because those women and sometimes the men who are educating those classrooms, teachers, become important, because they're the ones who are continually to teach this information during Negro History Week, that is now we think of Black History Month. And this memory of the service of these veterans to continue on will continue in these spaces pretty much until the Civil Rights Movement and those gains make it possible forward. And it's in this spirit, in memory of this long tradition, that on early September this year, that I was able to go to the Elizabeth City and participate in the We Want More History, and to go down to the marker by the Mid-Atlantic Christian University, and that having that where the encampment was, where soldiers first came and were able to be situated before they depart off to war, but also to engage with students in the other history, from the Emancipation Day celebrations to the GAR reunion to this other history, and why it's important to mark it in public spaces. So this image with two current Elizabeth City students, university students who were there for that day, we were able to teach and talk about and remember together these Civil War veterans. So the work is ongoing, but one of the things that is hopefully is clear from this presentation is that Northeast North Carolina, Elizabeth City in particular, but also the surrounding counties, have a very rich history of African American soldiers, but also veterans. And it's that veterans history that we need to do more work to research, to write, and how they shaped a generation from the Civil War time to the present. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Green. That is just such a very interesting topic, and I feel like it's a topic that everybody needs to know. But we want to thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate you. It's great to see you again, and we hope that you get to come back to Elizabeth City real soon.